Hi, Nicholas Bugash here again. Welcome to getting the most out of your 444 Marlin, or rather, straight wall big game cartridge. This is a follow-up to my video about why the 444 Marlin is the best straight wall cartridge for deep woods big game hunting. If you haven't seen that, I encourage you to search for it on YouTube. Viewers there asked, how does the 444 compare to other cartridges? So today we'll discuss what is needed to humanely take big game, how cartridge names affect performance, and the idea of internal ballistics. For example, how are a 45 long Colt, a 45-70, and a 450 Marlin different if they use the same bullets? We'll discuss how bullet type affects its travel to the target, external ballistics. And we'll look at how bullet construction affects its performance on game, terminal ballistics. And we'll present actual results of various loads on game. Now this video is focused on the 444 Marlin, but the ballistic information discussed here applies to any cartridge. The idea we're going to pursue is how can you tune the cartridge you select to get the best performance on the game you're after. So you'll find some useful information here regardless of what cartridge you're using. Let's get started. Around 1963, my uncle gave me the book On Your Own in the Wilderness. This man, Townsend Whan, co-authored this text. He was a lifelong shooter and outdoorsman who hunted from Panama to British Columbia in wilderness areas during his lifetime from 1877 to 1961. The 35 Whan is named after him. Why am I referring to Whan here? Consider this quote from him. On no piece of equipment I know of has more been written than on the big game rifle. The discussion has been endless, much of it among authors who have never shot anything larger than a small deer in a forest close to civilization. Unlike those kind of expert writers, Whan hunted and harvested all sorts of game when much of the continent was still very wild, and he knew what he was talking about. I have found his recommendations about cartridge killing power to be accurate and still valid because our big game animals haven't evolved into tougher species since he made them. What is necessary to take big game humanely? Whan wrote, all that is then necessary is a cartridge that having a bullet of such weight and construction that at the velocity at which it is made to fire, it will smash through the heaviest shoulder blades and ribs surrounding the chest cavity and penetrate within. The minimum is, therefore, roughly speaking, the 257 Roberts, the 300 Savage, and the 35 Remington cartridges. This table shows the muzzle velocity and energy values of those cartridges as loaded when he wrote that. Although bullet weights and velocities vary, they can all produce kinetic energy at the target in the 1,000 and 2,000 foot-pounds range. He followed his minimum cartridge recommendations with this statement. As the weight of the bullet goes up, a proportionately lower velocity will still assure the same smash and energy. We can accept those kinetic energy values as a useful guide today. Notice that he differentiated smash and energy as separate terms. Let's discuss the effect that he called smash in more detail. Let me share some personal experiences to evaluate those minimum caliber and energy level recommendations. I took this spike elk in the Madison Range of Montana, and when skinning him, realized I was the third hunter that had tried to take him. The elk had this three-bladed broadhead lodged against his spine above the kidney. It penetrated the hide, but did not break the bone and cut the spinal cord that would have disabled his hind legs. Another hunter had shot this spike, and under the healed wound, I found this .243 caliber bullet flattened against his left shoulder bone. This 265 grain 444 Marlin bullet recovered from another animal, broke big bone, passed through the vitals, and had 25 inches total penetration. After examining and weighing the recovered bullet, I guessed that it likely came from the popular .243 Winchester cartridge. Let's consider the characteristics of that load. Its muzzle velocity is high, 3,200 feet per second, and its energy values fall within the range that Whan suggested was adequate for big game. However, the caliber is smaller, as is the bullet weight. The kinetic energy value was there, but not the smash. I shot a mule deer doe at 65 yards using a .44 Magnum handgun. The heavy 225 grain bullet cracked the deer's humerus, his upper front leg bone, in two, and the bullet stopped there. The deer walked about 30 yards and lay down, needing a second finishing shot. Again, not enough smash to penetrate the vitals for a swift, humane kill. The lighter high velocity and energy, smaller bullets, and the heavy lower velocity and energy, larger bullets, were both unable to penetrate large bones and reach the vital organs. A balance of bullet size, energy, and construction is needed to deliver the smash. Many hunters and ammunition companies have concluded that kinetic energy values at target of about 1,000 foot-pounds for medium game like deer and antelope and 1,500 foot-pounds for large game like elk and moose are useful standards. We can use those guidelines while keeping in mind the examples we just saw, that a bullet's velocity or kinetic energy or weight or construction by themselves don't produce the smash Whan wrote about. Those properties must be balanced to deliver the smash. Ammunition manufacturers often guide the best use of their loads. Remington recommends their 240 grain 444 load for big game. Federal recommends their 270 grain 440 load for big game. And Federal recommends this 300 grain 4570 load for medium game. And Hornady recommends their 265 grain flat point and FTX 444 loads for both medium and large game. The manufacturer balanced their load's velocity, kinetic energy, and bullet weight and construction for a specific use, and you should consider these guidelines when choosing your load. Now that we've discussed what is needed to humanely take big game, let's look at how we can select a load and get the most out of it. We'll consider internal ballistics, what happens inside the gun, external ballistics, what happens when the bullet leaves the muzzle, and terminal ballistics, what happens when the bullet arrives on target.
Internal ballistics is what happens inside the gun. Cartridge case wall and head thickness affect the pressure limits. It's the gas pressure pushing the bullet that generates the muzzle velocity and energy values. For example, the 450 Marlin is designed to handle higher pressures than the 4570. Bullet diameter, shape, material also affect internal ballistics because they contribute to sealing the gases, which affects load velocity and shot-to-shot consistency, and also they can have friction against the bore that affects the muzzle velocity.
The rim case is often used in lever actions, like the 444 Marlin. The rimless case is often used in bolt and semi-automatic actions like the AR-15. The belted case is most often used for Magnum cartridges. And there are also variations like the semi-rimmed and rebated rim cases that are more rarely used. The key point here is that you need to use the cartridge type that is compatible with your gun. Viewers asked, how does the 4570 compare to the 444 Marlin? The 444 Marlin is 5.4% taller in the case. The 4570 is 6.5% wider. The 4570 bullet is 23% heavier for the same ballistic coefficient. The 4570 has a slightly greater case volume, and the 444 is loaded to higher pressure. Let's look at the pressure differences between the 4570 and 444 and how that affects load performance. Cartridge names can be made to motivate sales, but even if the cartridge is called a Super Express Magnum T-Rex Eliminator, it's the chamber pressure that pushes the bullet out of the barrel and determines the muzzle velocity and energy the load produces. The table displays 45 caliber cartridges in black and 44 caliber in green, with the highest Sporting Arms and Ammunition Institute chamber pressures at the top. Notice that the cartridges made over 150 years ago for black powder have much lower chamber pressures than the newer cartridges developed for smokeless powder. The 1873 Springfield Rifles action that first chambered the 4570 is very weak compared to more modern rifles. Reloading manuals will list more powerful 4570 loads for modern rifles, and manufacturers produce some. But note that their pressures are lower than the 444 Marlin. That explains the much flatter trajectory of the 444 loads compared to the 4570 in my earlier video. At these pressures, the 444 will just shoot flatter. It's physics. Marlin introduced the 450 Marlin load at higher pressures for shooters who wanted a 45 caliber with flatter trajectory, and they belted its case to prevent it from being chambered in the weaker guns. This graph shows the recoil of the cartridges in the preceding table. The old 1873 4570 load has fairly mild recoil compared to the 444, but the heavy 4570 loads are considerably stouter than the 444. Heavy recoil has two disadvantages in a hunting rifle. It can induce a shooter's flinch, an involuntary jerking motion that throws off the shot and can cause poor hits or misses, and slow recovery time for the rifle to settle back on target. Let's take a look at the benefit of manageable recoil in a running deer simulation. Sometimes when still hunting, you may surprise an animal at close range and have the opportunity to take a doable running shot. We'll use cardboard deer cutouts placed a few yards apart to simulate a game animal starting to run that needs a follow-up shot. We've got 1 gallon jugs at the vital zone and following load. That's the setup. Let's see how it goes. The average time between hits for several tries was 1.5 seconds. Now keep in mind that we simulated a starter animal that is just beginning to run. A deer running at full speed would cover about 80% of the field of view in 1.5 seconds. Now let's look at the external ballistics.
External ballistics is what happens when the bullet leaves the muzzle. The shape of the bullet controls how much velocity and energy it delivers to the target, and the trajectory of the bullet that affects the ease of hitting the target.
A bullet's ballistic coefficient is a measure of how easily it passes through the air. Hornady's 265 grain FTX bullet for the 444 is longer, has a sharper point, and a ballistic coefficient of 0.225, whereas Hornady's 265 grain flat point interlock for the 444 is shorter, has a flat point, and a lower ballistic coefficient. Let's see how those differences affect the bullet's trajectories and energy retention. The table shows the bullet height compared to the line of sight for the two factory loads using these bullets. Both loads are sighted 2 inches high at 100 yards. This trajectory curve of the table values shows the path of the bullets looking from the side. Notice that the curves are virtually identical to 150 yards, after which the flat point interlock load has less drop than the FTX bullet. Now we might expect the higher ballistic coefficient FTX to have a flatter trajectory, but in this load, the shorter flat point bullet takes up less space in the case, leaving more room for powder, and is able to attain a higher muzzle velocity. The flat point load maintains its flatter curve to the end of the graph at 350 yards. The lower table shows the energy values of the two loads at 50-yard intervals. The energy value shows that the flat point load has greater energy from the muzzle out to about 250 yards. Then, beyond 250 yards, the flat point bullet begins to lose energy more rapidly than the FTX bullet because of the FTX's higher ballistic coefficient. Under 200 yards, this flat point load appears to offer better performance. Beyond 250 yards, the FTX load has an advantage. Now, very high-tech bullets made for extremely long-range shooting may offer no advantage for short to medium-range hunting, that is under 200 yards. Also, they may cost more and may expand too much at close range because they're engineered for longer range, lower velocity expansion. A bullet doesn't travel in a straight path identical to the line of sight. Sighting a big game rifle to be dead on at 100 yards may make it harder for the hunter to harvest his game. The bullet leaves the muzzle of a scope-sighted rifle about 1.5 inches below the line of sight and travels in an arc that crosses up and then down across the line of sight as shown in this side view drawing of the trajectory. As shown in my earlier video, a deer's heart is about 4 inches from top to bottom. Drawing a 4-inch vital zone on this trajectory curve shows that the bullet never gets near the top of the vital zone with 100 yards zero, and it drops below the vital zone at 140 yards. Now the shooter can adjust the zero range to keep the bullet within the vital zone when aiming at the center of the heart for a maximum range. Making the zero range 157 yards allows the rifleman to aim at the center of the vital zone and keep the bullets in the zone out to 182 yards. This adds over 40 yards to the range at which the rifleman doesn't have to think about bullet drop when aiming at the hard vital zone. Now, if the rifleman's in very thick cover, where being able to shoot through small openings in the brush is the goal, they might choose a zero that keeps the bullet within 1 inch of line of sight. If you're hunting from a stand, you might want to be dead on at a particular range. On the other hand, if the shooter is shooting long ranges, they might choose a zero that allows a 3-inch rise above the line of sight. Hornady has a great free online ballistic calculator that makes it easy for you to evaluate different loads. You can type in a bullet's ballistic coefficient, which you can get from the manufacturer's website, the load's muzzle velocity, its bullet weight, the maximum calculation range, the interval that you want calculations displayed, and the calculation zero range. You can even enter your estimated hunt temperature and altitude, which will affect the load performance. Then you can adjust the zero range to get the results. In this example, a 157-yard zero put the bullet 2 inches high at 100, and the load still retains 1,500 foot-pounds of energy past 175 yards. I find it handy to make a range card with information that I need to decide if a long shot's advisable and how to adjust my hold on the target for that range. The ballistic calculator has an option to print these out, but they call them cheap sheets. Let's simulate how setting a zero range helps us make long shots. In this simulation, imagine you see your quarry across an open space between the trees. I've placed markers at 50, 100, and 150 yards, and my cardboard cutout deer is next to the 150-yard marker with a gallon water jug in front of his vital zone. I'm using my 444 Marlin with its 1 to 3 variable scope set at 3x, the 0 for the 300 grain Hornady hand load, which is in a microgroove barrel, allows me to hit the vital zone with a center hold. The load retains enough energy for big game, and the water spray will help you to see the vital zone hit. This all comes together. Your barrel length affects your load performance. Manufacturers and reloading manuals present muzzle velocity data for their loads using a specified barrel length. If your barrel length is different, you'll get different performance. The table shows the trajectory values for a 45-70 load shot from 3 different barrel lengths. The graph shows a side view of the path of each of the bullets. Out to about 100 yards, there is little difference, but at 250 yards, the bullet from the 16-inch barrel drops 7.5 inches more than it would from a 22-inch barrel. Barrel length also affects the kinetic energy of the bullet striking the target. The lower chart shows the energy values for the three barrel lengths. The graph shows the energy values along a side view of the bullet's path for the three loads. The red line shows an accepted minimum energy value at the target for big game. The 16-inch barrel drops below the minimum energy at about 140 yards, while the bullet from the 22-inch barrel maintains the minimum energy to about 220 yards. Extra barrel length gives the same load more smash potential farther down range. You can choose the right barrel length for your use by considering these effects.
Terminal ballistics is what happens when the bullet arrives on target. A bullet's shape and construction affect the wound channel that it makes, how deeply it can penetrate into tissue, and its ability to break bones and continue penetration. In Whan's words, the smash.
Let's look at different bullet construction designs intended to convert the on-target kinetic energy into game harvesting smash. The jacketed soft point bullet typically has a copper jacket and a lead core. Its jacket thickness and core hardness can vary. A jacketed hollow point includes a hollow point to start expansion sooner and at lower velocities. Hornady's FTX bullets have a soft, flexible pointed tip that is safe in tubular magazines and provides a higher ballistic coefficient. It has a hard, high antimony core secured to the jacket by an interlock ring. Hornady's flat point interlock has a tapered jacket with inner expansion grooves and an interlock ring to secure its jacket to the core. Swift's A-frame bullet has a jacket partition that controls expansion and a hollow point. They claim these bullets will expand from 950 to over 2,100 feet per second. Let's take a look at what people are saying about different 444 bullets. The first 444 load has long been accused of being inadequate because of the alleged use of revolver bullets. Years ago, I had heard that Remington said the 444 bullet was different from the .44 Magnum handgun bullet. I contacted Remington to verify this and was told that all the people involved with developing the 444 were gone. I asked Sandra if the current engineering staff could help me with this question and got the following reply. We just recently conducted an audit of the terminal performance of the 444 Marlin 240 grain core lock and ballistic gelatin at 100 yards. The results were as follows. Penetration 18 inches. Expansion 1.9 times. Weight retention 98%. Remington lists this load for big game use. Introduced in 1939, the core lock has been recognized as the first controlled expansion bullet. It's the bullet that the 444 was introduced with in 1965, and hunters are still using it 60 years later. Hornady released its 265 grain flat point interlock bullet made especially for the 444 Marlin in 1967. It is available in their 444 Superformance load. Here are some viewer use reports that supplement my details of successful whitetail and greater kudu hunts in my earlier video. This commentator has been using it successfully for 40 years. This viewer reports 3.5-inch groups at 200 yards, and this fellow has used it in his 444 that has taken elk, moose, whitetail, and black, brown, and grizzly bears over 25 years. It's a proven bullet. This hunter wrote in a forum post, instead of giving an opinion or what I think, I like to share real-world experience. These bullets were recovered from South Carolina whitetail deer. The ranges were from 50 to 100 yards. He used a 444S Marlin with his 300 grain XTP handloads. Now this bullet was intended for handguns, and Hornady lists its recommended muzzle velocity range as 7 to 1500 feet per second. My reloading manual and the ballistic calculator indicate this load would have had about 1790 feet per second at 50 yards and 1650 feet per second at 100 yards, roughly 10 to 20% above Hornady's recommendations, but they performed on whitetails as shown and described. He gets one hole groups at 100 yards, never lost a deer shot with one, and reports that most fall over like the wind blew on them real hard.
My viewer reported that his early Marlin 444 with a 1 38-inch twist microgroove rifling shoots 1-inch groups at 100 yards, dispelling a myth that I discussed in my earlier video. The 25-year 300 grain XTP user mentioned earlier, who has taken elk, moose, whitetail, and black, brown, and grizzly bears, wrote that his 444 is his go-to woods gun.
I'm going to wind down today with viewer reports about the kinds of medium and big game that they take with the 444 Marlin. The 444 shot clear through an East Texas buck at 50 yards and it never took a step. Other viewers report success on antelope, small and large white-tailed deer, mule deer, elk, bison, moose, black bear, with the 444 Marlin, including a one-shot 250-yard black bear kill. Would Whalen find the 444 Marlin delivers energy for smash? We've listed his minimums, the 257 Roberts, the 300 Savage, and the 35 Remington, and here's how the 444 compares to them. Yes, I think he'd like the 444 for big game. When we optimize our rifle and cartridge for the game and do our part, we can bring home the venison. We defined minimum cartridges to humanely take medium and big game, and then considered internal ballistics, external ballistics, and finally terminal ballistics. I hope you found some information here that will help you enjoy shooting your 444 or other cartridge and make your hunts successful. Please feel free to send me a message with any questions or comments. I want to make a video about the best 444 loads, so if you're inclined to share yours, please send the details on the load and hunts you've used it on. And don't forget to contact Marlin and ask them to make new 444 rifles.